Hi, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to another YouTube video. In today's video, I'm going to be wrapping up my off-season training. So I'm going to be talking about how my entire 6 months went from start to finish of off-season, and then I'm starting competition prep next. But anyways, let's just hop right into the video. Before I document my entire 6 months of off-season progress and all the wins and the specific focuses that I had, I wanted to show where I ended up before starting off-season, which was my first meet at almost 9 months postpartum, where I hit 237 pounds on squat, 154 pounds on bench, and 347 pounds on deadlift. It was about 50 pounds underneath where my max strength was before pregnancy, which was 259 squat, 165 bench, and 369 deadlift. So this was just my baseline going into the competition prep. And now after that off-season 6 months, I feel like I'm at a place where I'm at least matching my pre-pregnancy numbers, but I'll be excited to test that out after I start competition prep. Now, starting with squats have always been my most strugglesome lift, so when it came to my off-season progress, I was having to take a little bit of a different mental approach than my other lifts. A lot of my work was just focused on building my confidence with certain weights rather than adding more weight on the bar. So this was at the very beginning of my off-season where I hit 215 with a slight pause and 225 without a pause. And then this was most recently week 3 of my current training block. I still have one more lift to go that I'll insert at the end after I do it, which is going to be testing 225 again. But I hit 4 reps at 220 pounds with ease. So much faster, smoother. The depth was hitting for every single rep. That was one of my concerns at the beginning of my off-season because that was a struggle that I had going into my last competition prep. When I was pregnant, my depth started to creep up a little bit just because obviously squatting with a huge pregnant belly poses its challenges. With squats, I also had a lot of variation work throughout my off season, so there were a lot of different movements that I pushed outside of just the regular competition squat, which did help build my confidence and also just build more of a solid hypertrophy base. So adding that good leg size on squats, hamstrings, glutes, and that's obviously going to carry over into your maximal strength. So safety bar Hatfield squats was one of my wins where I hit 7 reps at 265 pounds. I also had some other movements like 1.5 rep high bar squats. I had some regular high bar squats. And then you'll also see an example of an accessory progression where I started my off season where I was only doing like 35 pounds on step ups. And then by the end, I was able to go up to 55 pounds. So just those slow incremental progress each week after week, and then back off slightly at the start of the next training block, but still your base is going to be slightly higher. So making sure that I'm putting intention into my accessory movements and not just my compound lifts has been something that has helped especially carry over into my squat progress. Split squats are another one where I started with 40s being a struggle, and then most recently I had 65s. But overall, everything was super solid with squats. It requires a lot of patience when it comes to my squats, but I am persevering even though it's my least favorite lift because it's the lift that I'm built the worst for. And one of the biggest wins of this off season was finishing it off with 3 reps at 225 pounds. You saw at the beginning of this, I was barely hitting 1 rep at 225 pounds at the start of off season, and then I only hit 12 pounds more than that after a peak in my competition, and now I'm able to easily rep out 225 pounds, which may not seem like a lot, but squat is my most strugglesome lift, so it was a win, and the depth was improved too. When it comes to making progress over a long period of time, small efforts, small wins over time really do compound. I had 6 total training blocks throughout my off season. And this was week 4 of my first off-season training block where I hit 4 reps at 135 pounds. It was pretty challenging on that last rep, probably about RP 8, maybe even RP 9. And then this was my 6th off-season training block, hitting 7 reps at RP 9. So I definitely made a lot of progress on bench, and adding 1 rep every single training block might not seem like a lot. Some training blocks I even hit the same number of reps with 135, and I didn't see that progress immediately, but over time, if you keep with it, those small wins really do add up, and it's worth it to just keep staying on the track, making sure you're deloading, making sure you're backing off at times, and then making sure you're pushing yourself at times. And even with 145, for example, I hit 2 reps at the start of the training block, but it was like a really, really slow 2 reps. And then in my most recent training block, I hit 2 sets of 3 at 145 pounds. So it might not seem like a huge win, but it still does add up over time. And then I was able to hit 150 pounds for singles really, really easily by the end versus really struggling. And I was only able to hit that in my peaking block right before my last competition. And then when it comes to pushing accessories, on the left, you'll see me doing 110 pounds, and on the right, I'm doing 120 pounds. So really pushing those smaller isolation movements that might not seem like they're as important or essential in your workout helps, because you're going to add the strength into your compound lifts as well. Even if it might not seem as exciting to hit a lat pull down PR, you're still going to see those benefits on your main lifts over time. And then another one was incline bench with 40s versus flat bench with 55s. Obviously, incline is a harder position, but adding 15 pounds in each arm was a huge win. I was not able to even touch the 55s at the beginning of my off season, and now I'm able to hit it for 3 sets of 8 with ease, so that was a huge win. And then with pull-ups, at the beginning, I was not even doing any pull-ups. I was doing maybe a couple of body weight sets. I mean, I could still do them, but I wasn't training them or testing them. And then at the end, most recently, I hit 4 reps with 25 pounds extra added on. I'm 145 pounds body weight. And then I also hit 6 reps with 20 pounds added on. So overall, my upper body strength was probably the slowest in terms of actual number progressions. But when I look at those small wins each training block, and then I compare the full 6-month time span, it turns out to be a lot bigger wins. So it pays off to stick with it and be patient. And further on the topic of patience, deadlifts were by far the lift that I approached with the most patience. So this was my first training block, 305 pounds, moving pretty slowly at the last week of my first off-season training block versus 335 pounds, moving faster than 305 did in week 4 of my 6th off-season training block. And then that was the first time I hit 315 pounds. I believe it was my 2nd off-season training block versus my most recent training block hitting 3 reps at 315 with ease. So the approach with deadlifts was to start off like literally just acclimation singles and then some back off volume and keeping the RPEs really low. And even as I was progressing through the training blocks, when in doubt, I always erred on the side of precaution. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't really even touching above RP6 until that last week of the training block. And even then, I think I only hit RP8 maybe twice on my deadlifts throughout the entire off season. And as you can see, my rep work significantly improved, not just the amount of time between reps, but obviously the weight. So that was 285 on the left versus 295 on the right, and 295 was moving faster than 285 pounds at the beginning for my back off sets. And then RDL is another example, 90 pounds for my rep work versus 225 pounds for my rep work with a barbell. So obviously different loading patterns, so slightly easier with the barbell, but still adding on a lot of progress. But the patience really paid off, and I was able to stay healthy, which was the biggest priority, and just making sure that I'm not exceeding RP6 usually. All right, just some closing thoughts on my off-season training. So it was an entire 6 months, and I would recommend a solid 6 months, even more, for every single off-season before starting competition prep, especially if you've been competing for a long time, because you really need to give yourself time to make progress. In the moment, if you're just doing one training block, week 1 to week 4, you're not going to see much of a difference between, the last week 4 of your previous training block. But if you actually line up those training blocks, 6-month time span, you can make a lot of progress, even if you've been lifting for a long time. Even just adding 1 rep every single training block, it adds up over time. But I feel like it was a very successful conservative off season, and I stayed healthy the whole time, which was the biggest win, because that's honestly what I feel like holds the most people back in strength sports, is you're pushing yourself too much and then you end up getting injured, and then you have to dial back, and then you have to take time off, or you have to modify. So just being patient and giving yourself time is the biggest thing that you can do in strength sports, powerlifting specifically. But anyways, that's all for today's YouTube video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Let me know if there's anything you want me to talk about in future videos. Like I said, I'm going to be starting competition prep, so in next week's video I'll be starting that new series. But anyways, that's all for today's video. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next week for another video. Bye.